Howdy folks, this is Paul talking about A Course in Miracles. I'm going to be talking about this strange subject of non-duality. What is it anyway? Does it really apply to A Course in Miracles? Is it a good fit? Now, long story short, A Course in Miracles isn't really non-duality. It's a little bit different, but it's in some ways similar, and in some areas in particular it's very much the same. But there's a bit more to A Course in Miracles than just a non-duality teaching. And some people will take the idea that it's non-duality and will just project that onto the Course and say, this is a non-duality, this is what it means, this is the whole story. But then it becomes a bit blinding, because then you've got this sort of box that you've put it into and projected onto it, and now you're saying A Course in Miracles is this, and then that kind of acts as a bit of a blinder to not see areas where it's not really a non-duality teaching. So what is this strange word, non-duality? It starts with duality. What is that? Who makes up this stuff? So duality has the word dual in it, meaning two, and we tend to refer to space-time and planet Earth and physics as dualistic or dual, because there's more than one thing. There's 5 potatoes and 10 apples, so we say this is duality. A sense of separation where something's over there and something's over here, and this is separate from that, and blah blah blah. So it seems to produce many things, separate things, and then we say, okay, this is dualistic, this is duality, this is the separation. And then we start thinking, well, I don't want this, it's not very nice. So then we start looking for what is the opposite, or what is the alternative. And typically the train of thought will go like this. It will go, if two things is bad, and if two things implies separation, and we don't want separation because separation is a bad thing, then we'll get rid of the separation, and that will end up with one thing. And one is a lot better than two, because now one seems to somehow relate to the word oneness. It seems to somehow be nice and simple. It's nice and reduced. It seems as though you can't get any simpler than just one single thing. So now we say the truth must be that it's not two, it's one. Now we've got this idea that a single count of one is the opposite of having many things, or that oneness, as though everything is all one thing, is the opposite of having many things and having separations and having egos and bodies. And this becomes a very basic sort of idea of how to describe reality. People have been doing this for a long time, not just with the Course in Miracles. I used to have the belief that the physical universe was all there was, this was real, and yet somehow behind all of the separate bits and pieces there is a single God, a oneness, a sort of a unified single thing that somehow encompasses it all. God is everywhere, God is in everything. And it's a very basic sort of idea of what we might call a non-duality idea, that it's all one. And so then we start putting this idea of one on a pedestal, and we start saying God is the oneness, and we want to get to the oneness, and I want to get out of the separateness into the oneness. And this becomes a whole, that's like your whole spiritual journey is supposedly described by moving from separations, which seem to produce many things, towards a unified, singular whole, of oneness, being the whole one of everything, being the universe. Somehow it's almost as if to say you are God, you are the single whole, you are one with everything, it's all you. That's a fairly basic sort of view of what a lot of people think we're going to be doing. This is how how it works. This is how reality is structured. This is the nature of God. This is what the truth is. That we're going to be going from this dualistic world to some kind of reality that is one big blob, one big thing. But this doesn't account for some of the qualities of God, such as God creating a sun. To even have one sun, the one Son of God, seems to imply two things. And you can't really sort of just smush it and say, well, there's only really God there, but the Son is the sort of extra God tacked on or something. It doesn't really explain it properly. So we like to be nice and super clear and black and white with our logic. So there are no exceptions. So in order for God to have a Son, there has to be some kind of something, some kind of division of a wall or a separateness or some kind of a something that you could say is a thing in order to say that there is a Son there. And that doesn't really gel with the idea of oneness. So a lot of people sort of turn a blind eye to that, and they sort of gloss over it and just sort of imagine it to be like somehow there's a Son of God and somehow this Son is one with God and you can't tell them apart and it's all one thing. It's easy to say this stuff, but it doesn't really make sense. It's not clean, logical conclusions to say that. It's sort of what we might call a fuzzy logic, or like a glue, where you're sort of just magically sort of believing that it just somehow is working, and that's not enough of an explanation, really. It's not a nice, clean, complete explanation. So there's also the problem that in A Course in Miracles we're told that we also have creations. So that's not exactly hinting at not having a duality. It's not exactly saying, hey, you're the only thing that exists, or there's only a oneness, or it's all God, or that there's nothing but this oneness. Because there does seem to be a lot of parts in the Course that do say God having a sonship, God creating angels, God creating a Holy Spirit, God, you having creations that even have their own creations. That's all in A Course in Miracles. So now, if we're sort of trying to get to a non-duality view of it's all one thing, it sort of isn't totally compatible with these other aspects of reality. So the Course is kind of saying, in reality, in truth, God is actually a creator and has actually created something kind of other than himself, which somehow isn't violating oneness and breaking reality. And yet there's this thing there. There's a Son, there's many sons, there's creations of creations. And we can't just deny that. We can't just cover that up. So now we have a problem. We've got a sort of a paradox where we have this drive to maintain a sense of oneness, because we like this idea of one nice big clean, can't be reduced any further, final sort of statement that it's all oneness. And there certainly are many things in A Course in Miracles that say that there is a oneness. There is, God is everything, and there's no opposite, and it's all one, and there's nothing outside this oneness, and that all seems to point to and imply that there's only God sitting there by himself, and that there's nothing else. There's not really any sons, there's no Holy Spirit getting created, there's no creations or creations of creations, there's no kingdoms. So then we have this sort of tug of war. There's this sort of an incompatibility between big chunks of A Course in Miracles that definitely point to a oneness, that very completely state that there is only this oneness, and yet there's other chunks of the same course saying that there are many things, and God's having many thoughts, and God's thoughts are living beings, and there's a sonship that God has created with many sons in it. It seems to be saying two different things in the same course at the same level, and that seems like that doesn't make any sense. So because it seems like it doesn't make any sense, a lot of well-intentioned people try to make sense of it using the ways that they normally make sense of things, which I'll get to in a minute, by deciding we're tending to go in favor of the oneness because we don't like the separateness, and we're going to sort of lean towards the parts of the Course that talk about oneness as being the truth. The other parts must be false. It's either got to be that God is just oneness, or there are these sort of separate beings, many things, and somehow that must mean there isn't a oneness. And we can't have that. We don't like that. It's not spiritual enough. So we're going to lean towards the oneness parts in the Course, and we're going to shut out and push away, separate from the parts that talk about there being many things in reality, as if this is a solution to the paradox. And just about everybody's doing this. Everybody's having this same kind of problem-solving approach to try to deal with this big giant paradox that's in the Course. Everybody's sort of trying to put stuff in a box. Everybody's trying to say it has to either be this or it's this, and we don't like it being this, so it has to be this. It's got to be a oneness. There has to be a oneness in reality. The Course is screaming that there's a oneness, that God exists and it's all one. So how can it be possible that there are many things in reality, that God has many children, or that there are creations of creations, or that the Holy Spirit was ever created, or that there's a Trinity? And it's all in the Course. All of these pieces are in the Course, but what people like to do is to focus only on this piece, this oneness piece, because it seems to imply that there's other stuff talking about separations and separate beings and kingdoms and creations of creations and so on. It all seems to sound rather too much like separateness. It seems that there's a big separation there, so we don't like that. So we're just going to throw the sonship in the trash, describe it as a fragmentation of the sun, gloss over the fact that there is even one sun, which violates the whole idea of oneness, and we're just going to sort of make them into metaphors, or we're going to say they're ego, or we're going to just lump them in with the body or something. Put them in the bad box, put them where the separate things go, and keep the nice tidy oneness things in this other nice little uncluttered box over here. But this is a quite a horrible failure to resolve the paradox of what's in the Course, these seemingly contradictory pieces that people are sort of saying, instead of changing how I view this so that I can understand how they can both be true and how Jesus is not lying about any of it, and how even the parts about the separate many things is not a problem and is not violating reality and is not part of the separation. Instead of changing our minds about how we perceive and how we think, we stay rooted in a way of thinking that is based on separation, based on separate boxes, based on exclusion, based on using separation to solve problems. And we use that approach to look at A Course in Miracles and divide up and segment and partition off chunks that seem like they're not compatible because of how we're looking at it. And that results in a butchering of the full message of A Course in Miracles as its description of what reality is like. We end up just sort of homing in on this big chunk over here and ignoring this big chunk over here. We start developing beliefs and explanations and justifications for why this nasty separate piece can't be true, and it can't be part of the Course, and it must be some kind of illusion thing. But we've basically failed horribly to really correctly be open-minded and to let the Course itself tell us what is true, and to accept it without distorting it, without needing to make these adjustments, without needing to put it in boxes. This all goes back to the separation from God and the effect that it's had on people's minds and how people have started to think in a separated state, and how they're so conditioned to think this way that they cannot see how the seeming paradox of A Course in Miracles reality can be resolved in any way other than to separate out the oneness from the seeming manyness of souls or creations or the Holy Spirit or the Trinity. So instead of realizing that the way they think has a problem, that the whole approach to reasoning and drawing conclusions and making sense of things has been infected by the ego and has been heavily distorted, and people don't realize how much they think with the ego about absolutely everything, including God and oneness and reality. And because they don't realize the indoctrination and the heavy degree of I will think like an ego, how much they're projecting that onto A Course in Miracles and drawing faulty conclusions like A Course in Miracles is non-duality, there are no separate things in reality, God doesn't have many sons, God doesn't create many things, doesn't have many thoughts, those are ego ideas. They only seem like ego ideas because the ego is projecting onto the Course and seeing a reflection of its own nature in certain parts of it and not in the other parts, and thinking that it's finding the truth. So I'm going to tell you what this is, and why this happens, and what is wrong with our thinking. Because we're not thinking in a way that is able to accommodate the true nature of reality. And this can be explained. This is not too difficult if you can follow this. If I can put it into words reasonably, It's it does have an explanation. I'm just going to have a quick bite because I'm a little bit not totally on top form today, so need a little refuel. So here's what we're doing. Here's what we're doing wrong. We've separated from God, and we believe we have, and we've produced a space-time which is set up in such a way that it symbolizes the separation. In the Course it says that the world is a symbol of the ego or something, the body is a symbol of the ego, the world is a symbol of the separation. So basically we formed an ego insane mind that had this belief in being separate and being opposite and rejecting oneness and so on, and being in denial, and this projected out as the physical world. From the tiny mad idea, we ended up making bodies and planets and stuff. And this has come from our mind. And it's come from the ego thought system. So it's come from a way of believing and perceiving that is very deeply rooted in separateness. And because of that, it produced this idea of space. And space is the idea that what's over here is not over here. And there's a separation, there's a gap, there's a distance between, there's a delay of time. So space and time is sort of a physicalized version of the idea of separation. And so now you've got separate seeming bodies and separate houses and separate cars. And there's a space and a time between them that keeps them apart. So space itself and time are attacks on God's reality. They're opposite to God's nature. Space is saying there is nothing whole anywhere. What's over there is only partial. What's over here is only partial, part of the whole. And neither of them are the whole. And they're both lacking, so there's no wholeness anywhere. So space is already an attack on God's infinite, omnipresent nature. And time is an attack on eternity. Time says what has always existed has changed, and it no longer exists, and it's died. Time is death. This is the world of time where all things end, says the Course. So you've got space and time working together as an attack on God. The world was made as an attack on God, an attack on his nature, an attack on how his mind thinks, an attack on his functioning. And because we're stuck in bodies and we're seeing with the body, and the body makes the world seem real, all of our thinking since childhood becomes conditioned by physical reality, the illusion of the world, things being separate, everything seeming to be separate. And we're very, very, very used to thinking along the lines of separate things. And in the separation from God, the ego made up this logical state of not God, not truth, not immortality, not sharing, not unlimitedness. It opposed every attribute of God. So now you've got the opposite of God showing up as mortality and separateness and suffering and death and so on, which is the physical world. In that logical state of not truth, it's also a logical state of not both and not and, These are logic gates in electronics, like NAND and NOT. So we rejected the idea that something can be outside the separation. So now we've got nice little separate boxes where we say either the object is in this box or the object is in this box. Either it's over there or it's over here. Either I'm going to go through that door or this door. I'm either going to wear my blue shirt or my green shirt. So that all of space-time, because of how it's structured, is all set up to be to testify and teach you that what's over there is not over here. It's either there or it's here, but it's not in both places. So this whole idea of both, or and, or sharing, or inclusiveness is denied by the not reality, because that's the nature of God, both and. The nature of the separation is either or. So everybody starts to think like how the world functions, starts to think in terms of separateness, boxes, categories, labels. That's mine, that's yours, this is my body separate from your body. So we become very used to this sort of rhythm of thought process, and we start to use this way of thinking to draw conclusions about the world. And we start thinking like, I'm in my car and I'm either going to take the left turn or the right turn, or I'm going to either buy the red dress or the green dress, or today I'm either going to do some work or I'm going to skive off, or whatever. What am I going to have for dinner? I'm going to either have the chicken or the turkey or whatever it is. We're very used to thinking this way, and we even start to reason and draw conclusions based on either or. If the child is going down the slide, the child is not at the top of the slide, the child is in the middle of the slide. And that seems to make sense, because it sort of follows the logic of the physical world. So we actually start making sense and drawing conclusions using deductive reasoning based on separation, heavily rooted in the ego, about what's true. And so now all of our what's true conclusions are driven by a foundation, a false premise of everything is separate. This, unfortunately, leads to people using this same thought process. If this, then that. Otherwise that. Either this or that. Can't be both. You can't have a person that is in that house and in that house at the same time. Not allowed, because that's not how the physical world works. You can't have, I give you all of the pizza and I still have all the pizza. Where it says in the Course in Miracles, to give, to have all, give all to all. Giving and receiving are one. This is not compatible with either or. This is not compatible with how space-time works, how physical objects work. It does not make sense to the way of reasoning that people are using all over the place. Because it's like saying, if I give you my object, I lose the object. We can't both have it. It doesn't belong to both of us. It's not mine and yours. So if I give you this chunk of food, you're going to be the one that's eating the food and I'm not going to have the food. Damn it. because that's how this world works, and everybody starts thinking like this. But that is not compatible with statements in A Course in Miracles, such as giving and receiving are one, where if I give to you, I still have what I have given to you because I'm sharing it, and there's no compromise, there's no limitation to how much we both have. We both have all of it at the same time. This is the meaning of to have all, give all to all. If I give everything to other people, I will have everything. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever in this mindset of it has to be either this or it has to be that, or separation-based reasoning. It doesn't make any sense, because God's laws are opposite in nature to how the ego thinks. God's reality has dynamics that are very, very different to space-time. In God's world, the golden rule applies. What you do to another, you do to yourself. Excuse me. Because your brother is a part of you, you're having a oneness. So if I attack the brother, I am literally attacking myself. But the ego and the space-time and the thoughts of either or wouldn't say that. They would say, if I'm attacking my brother, I'm getting away with murder. If I attack them, I'm not getting hurt. They're the ones getting hurt. That's separation-based ego thinking. Everybody in the world has been conditioned by the ego thought system to think and reason and draw conclusions based on this extraordinarily opposite way of thinking than God's reality, how God's laws work. The giving and receiving being one. When you give to others, it increases, and you both have it. This is transcendental. This is defying the entire system of the world. Now, here's where the problem of this non-duality thing comes in. Since we have lots of boxes, you can see lots of little compartments up here behind me. Each one of those has something in it. But the things that are in there are not in the other compartments. This red thing up here is not down there. This object is not up there. This teddy bear up here is not down here. Because they're separated out, and they have to abide by the ego laws of it's either there or there, and it's not in both boxes. So what people think is, because that suggests lots of separate boxes, and we want to get away from separation, and we've demonized separation, that if I get rid of all these boxes and end up just with one single box, that must be reality. That's nice and clean, nice and easy. Oneness, one little thing. Everything that exists is in this one little box, except this whole system of many boxes is a system of exclusiveness, because the ego is all about excluding and separating. So this is exclusively here, this is exclusively here, this is exclusively up there, and that basically means this whole way of thinking is based on excluding. So if we exclude these boxes and we exclude these boxes and we end up with this box, technically speaking, you haven't actually left the system. You haven't really got outside of this way of thinking, because now you're thinking this box is exclusively the truth. This box is being used within the system of exclusion to exclude all the other boxes, and this is passed off as oneness. this would be okay, except God is not in the business of excluding. God's not in the business of playing inside this system. And people don't realize that they are still inside the ego's thought system. They're still inside the ego's way of reasoning when they come up with the conclusion that the one special chosen box represents reality. They're still having a belief in one big gigantic box of reality that excludes everything else. And it is exclusive because there's no sense of inclusion, there's no sense of sharing, there's no sense of transcending the idea that you can't have things in more than one box at a time. That hasn't been transcended here. All we've done is cut some boxes out and covered our eyes, gone into denial, and taken a look at another box and decided that it's the chosen one. That's all we've done. So we haven't really sort of escaped the separation by concluding that reality is one big exclusive box. Because God's nature is not exclusive. God doesn't exclude in any way. God is all-encompassing, so everything that exists is within God. Exclusion is separation. So what would it be like if there was a oneness that wasn't exclusive? What would it be like if there was a oneness that wasn't also a mix of separation, which is what people use it like, basically saying the oneness is non-duality. It's an exclusive oneness, so anything that's not in the oneness is excluded, and therefore any sense of duality or creations or many things or sons of God or a sonship or a Holy Spirit, angels, anything that might even hint at there being more than one thing is now excluded. And this is it basically projects a prison onto God. It projects a closed system, an exclusive idea onto a God, a reality that has nothing to do with exclusion or imprisonment. It's too closed, it's too confined of an idea, and it still is within the ego thought system. This is a conclusion that is drawn on the basis of reasoning in exactly the same way that you reason about whether to go to the toilet. This it's all oneness, it's just God, is an ego conclusion. So the ego has come up with the idea of non-duality. Now, to understand why that's a problem, you've got to start looking at the real workings of God. What is God really like? How does his metaphysics work? How does he support the idea that giving and receiving are one? Or that you can have everything by giving everything? Or that God even has a son? I mean, in order to support the idea that God has a son, even one, the one Son of God, you have to be open to somehow there being more than one thing. And you can't just say it's a blur, you can't just say it's a fuzzy boundary, you can't just say it's drops of water in an ocean or beams of light in the sun. You can't just, there are no analogies in space-time that fit correctly. You can't just say, well, the Son of God is just God's light shining out, or it's just an extension of God, so it's the Son doesn't really have his own will, and the Son doesn't have his own existence. It's just God sort of sticking out a finger and wiggling it around. That's not what the Course says at all. So the problem is that everybody keeps thinking with the ego, thinking in a object-based, separation-based, exclusion-based way of reasoning, and drawing all conclusions about A Course in Miracles within that mindset. But this mindset is not open. It's not open to transcendence. It is not open to sharing. It's not open to love. It's very exclusive and very imprisoning. It's not open to freedom. It's not open to unlimited possibility. It's not open to power. It's not open to God having an infinite will. It's not open to creation. Because as soon as you introduce this idea that this is in the Course, divine abstraction takes joy in application, that is why he created you. God did not will to be alone. Like, for goodness sake, if God is not willing to be alone and has expressed his divine abstraction to create another being, that is no longer a single one thing. It's no longer a blob. It's no longer a non-duality. There is now two things there. And you have to pause there and not go into the oneness has been violated. No, it hasn't, actually. This is the paradox. This is what we have to solve. We have to find a way by which we can fully align with everything that it says in the Course, not just the bits we like or resonate with, not just the oneness parts, because it has a lot of material that very, very logically and clearly and correctly specifies excuse me, that God is a creator. God wills the creation of a son, at least one, because he doesn't want to be alone, and he takes great joy in creating. Love has to extend and be given, has to be shared. And because of God's absolute nature, okay, this is a bit mind-bending, and this is partly why people don't understand this. So put on your best thinking cap for a second. God is omnipresent. God is infinite. God is everywhere. But people may not realize that this doesn't just mean God is like a big object where some parts of God are over here, some parts are over there. There's his left hand, there's his right hand. He's not an object. So he's not limited by space or time. So that means God, in fact, all of God is over here. And this is the mind-bending part. All of God is over here at the same time. This is true omnipresence. You can't say God is only partly there and partly there. That's a space-time idea. All of God is everywhere. There's literally a quote in the Course that says, all of God is in every part of him, something along those lines. And the entirety of God's attention and awareness and knowing and presence is right here. And it's also right here, and it's right here and down here. It transcends limitations in such a way that you almost can't even imagine it. It's like a giant blur. It's like you've got this being who is multidimensional in a way and is capable of fully being present in this part of him and fully present over here at the same time, which means that there's a sharing between, there's a oneness where these two parts of God are the same. It's a little bit like quantum entanglement, but that's a bullshit thing, so we're not going to go there. It's kind of like the two are one, that there's a oneness and a two-ness at the same time. That's omnipresence. And without the ability of God to be sort of in two places at once, God would not be God. As then you'd have to say, some of God's over here and some of God's over there. God is separate from himself and lacking. That's an ego idea. So if you can get your head around the fact that the entirety of infinite, unlimited God is fully, specifically, precisely, and entirely present in one place, and in another place, and infinite places, simultaneously. That is God's nature. It's not a big blob, it's not a field of energy, it's not a single state thing, it's not just some bit of light shining. It's extremely, absolutely transcendental. And because of that nature, what applies to one part of God applies to the other. And this begins the golden rule. And what is true of one part of God is completely true of another part of God. And you'll find that what this reflects very closely and accurately is the one thing in this world that people have come up with that goes beyond the reasoning model of either or. And it's the holographic principle. It's the idea that there's a wholeness, and the whole is in every part, and every part is whole. All of God is in every part of God, and every part of God is all of God. And yet there are many parts of God, and every part of God is all of God. That's the truth. Which means reality, ultimate reality, God, isn't really non-duality. It's not just oneness, but it is oneness. There is sharing, there is this equality, there is this singular presence of God that is everywhere. But it also has this quality of the whole is in every part. And this is God's nature. There's literally a line in the Course that says this is the way God thinks. The whole is in every part, and every part is whole. This is the way God thinks, and what is true of him is true of you. Because of this, and because of God being a creator, that it takes joy in creating. Jesus has given me a quote. In the Course it says, in all editions, in the 3rd edition FIP, in the Earth text, etc., it says, God who encompasses all being, oneness, nevertheless, in capital letters, regardless of the fact that oneness is the truth, even without violating that truth, nevertheless has created separate beings who have everything individually and want to share it to increase their joy, because if they give what they've received, they will still have what they've received, and it will increase, because this is the law of God. So what you find is God's holographic nature leads to him creating whole parts which contain all of God and all of the kingdom. Here is a Son of God that is inherited all of God and shares all of God with God. Here's another Son of God that has been created by God and is a part of God and has wholeness and is whole in its own right and contains the whole, and all of God is in it. And here's another one, all of God is in it. Unlimited numbers. In the Course it says, heaven is the sum of all God's thoughts, in number infinite. And this produces what leads to another nice quote that says, one brother is all brothers. Every each mind contains all minds, or every mind contains all minds. Such is the truth. So if that's the truth, we're not going to be trying to get rid of brothers. We're not going to be trying to stop there from being many creations. We're not going to try to deny parts of the statement to favor other parts. We're not going to turn a blind eye. We're going to accept the whole thing, which says that God has created many sons as a sonship. Each of those sons is a brother because they're coming from the same parent, which makes them brothers. God is the same parent. They're all equal. Every one of them contains all of God. Every one of them is whole. Every one of them is absolutely created, fully created. As the Course says, the soul has not only been created perfect, it has been fully created. There is no lack in it. So God, in his infinite power, has literally created additional wholes. So now there are multiple wholes at the same time, which sounds like a paradox. But it's not a paradox because they are sharing the same whole, the one whole. So in a holographic structure you have a oneness, a wholeness, but you also have parts, and the wholeness is in every part as every part. So that then means that a son of God is like God and contains God, has an altar to God inside his soul. And that is A Course in Miracles. That's what it says about reality. There is a sonship full of countless, who knows how many beings that God has created, and the reason that it's not separation and it's not duality is because they are unlimited in their sharing. They are one with each other. The whole of God is in every son of God. And because of that dynamic, there is a whole and a part, and they are both whole. And there's a one whole shared by many parts. And it's the presence of the sharing that joins them together, and it is miraculousness that allows them to also be individual beings. So there are, in fact, individual beings that miraculously have everything that God has, and yet nevertheless are still also individual beings. So in reality, according to the Course, excuse me a sec. According to A Course in Miracles, the fullness of it, what it says, there are many sons of God. As the Course says, we are the kingdom, we the sons of God, because each son of God contains the whole. You are the whole of the kingdom, you are the whole sonship, you are the whole of Christ, but so is that other person that God created. We are all brothers, we are permanently brothers in reality. So the problem with non-duality becomes if you project a thought system of separateness, boxes, exclusive oneness, isolation, things that can't share, things that don't overlap, onto a reality system that is fundamentally holographic in nature, which defies boxes, doesn't have rules about can't share, doesn't have rules about I am not you, you are not me, we are separate, doesn't have rules about this is not allowed. If you project that onto God's sonship, it focuses on only an aspect of the holographic structure and not all of it. So what it ends up doing is it focuses on, yes, there's a oneness. There's a oneness. The whole of God in every part It's all one. There's a single oneness that everything shares. God is omnipresent. But God is a creator and has created children, has created beings that have everything individually. The whole is in the part. And this is not duality, this is not separation, and it's not non-duality. It's not the same. There's total support for the miraculous creation, God's miracles. The Course says, you are a miracle. The thing that allows God to create many beings that are individual in every way, but are still one, which sounds like an impossible paradox. How can you be an individual with your own mind, your own thoughts, your free will, at the same time as being one? But you can. And what Jesus uses in the Course to refer to that how is miraculousness, because reality is fundamentally miraculous. It is the holographic shared nature that allows this to be possible. In a holographic system, we have a form of logic. The logic is called paralogical reasoning. If you have not heard of paralogical reasoning, I suggest you look it up. It states that something can be true of this and that. It can be true of both. It is a system of both and. I have this and you have this. I am the whole kingdom of God. You are the whole kingdom of God. That is also the logic of holograms. So, the golden rule is based on this logic. What is true of me is true of you. We are one, and yet we are separate beings, separate and one, which you could say is oneness and duality, non-duality and duality. I like to call it trans-duality, but it's basically, it is actually that reality has these qualities and dynamics and metaphysics of the whole in every part, and every part is the whole. There are parts, so you could say it's duality, and there is a whole, so you could say it's non-duality. And while people keep having a war to try to separate these two, which is a projection of the ego thought system, we're not going to get to the realization that that's okay, that it's fully embracing the whole of what A Course in Miracles says about God's nature. So what people will do is, if you look at a holographic system, you'll see there's a wholeness there. So it must be a oneness. And then A Course in Miracles will start talking about that aspect of the hologram, the oneness, the nothing outside of it, nothing else is existing, nothing opposite to love, God is all-encompassing, all these kind of things that focus on specifically this aspect of a holographic system, making it sound as though, to an ego thinker, that it might not be supporting the idea of many creations, and therefore reality is oneness, and A Course in Miracles is non-duality. But this is not the whole of what it says. And you go to other passages in the same teaching, and it talks about God has only one Son, knowing them all as one, for example, which does not mean there aren't many sons. It does mean there are many sons that simultaneously God knows as one. He knows the oneness and the manyness. He knows each and every individual being as a container for the whole of himself. So the sonship with its many sons is simultaneously many sons that are one. And the one Son is the Christ. The Christ mind is the mind that joins the sons together, that they share as a shared identity. Just because it's a shared identity doesn't mean it's only one. Only one is exclusive. It's inclusive oneness. So I am Christ and you are Christ. And we are still ourselves. We are still individual beings. But we are also one. This is why it's hard for people to get their heads around the full message, because it's a bit mind-bending. It's transcending boxes. It's going beyond how we think. It's beyond how we reason. It's beyond how we draw conclusions, usually. All of God's mind and system and reality functions on a basis of both and, as its entire logic. The nature of reality is both this and that. God is here and there. All of everything is here and there. As you share and give to your brother, you do not lose what you've given, because you're one with him, and now you've given it to yourself, and now you both have it fully, without compromise, without having to have only half of it. We both have all of it simultaneously, and that now means that it has increased, because now there is increase of the kingdom. That's how it works. You are created to increase and add to the kingdom. It can only do that in a holographic system where giving and receiving are one, where the golden rule is functioning as the law of God. You can't really learn A Course in Miracles. You can't really take it on board if you're not willing to accept the golden rule. The golden rule defies all logic. It defies the whole idea that what you do to another you don't do to yourself, that you're not one with them. But people take it too far, and they start becoming narrow-minded and focusing exclusively on the aspects of the holographic system that are one. It is there, and it is fully one, but nevertheless, at the same time, because it's a system of oneness, it's a system of inclusion, of sharing, of giving and receiving, of love, of God not wanting to be alone, God willing to create, God extending, God giving you the power to co-create, you having your own creations. The Course even says your soul has a kingdom that it has created. You've got your own kingdom that you've created in reality. That's actually true, and it's not incompatible with this whole thing. It's not some error that was typed up in the urtext. So it's difficult for people to grasp, and it's because it's difficult and it's very outside the box of how people think, and because it's so radical and so different and so transcendental, and it has all this both and stuff going on, and this holographic sharing of there's like a separation and there's not a separation at the same time, and it doesn't mean duality, and it doesn't mean ego, and it doesn't mean bodies, and yet there are separate beings, and yet those separate beings are not separate, and yet they are. That's the truth. They are not separate, and they are separate. And is the logic piece. And people have great difficulty thinking this way. And this is why, because of everybody's conditioning to think in either or terms, this is why so many people are latching on to the idea that A Course in Miracles is a non-duality teaching. Because non-duality in its purest form does not allow there to be a Son of God. Sorry, can't have that. That's a separation. That's two. There's only God. And then people are literally believing, some even take it as far to say, I am literally all of God, and there's nothing else, it's just me. But A Course in Miracles doesn't say that. A Course in Miracles says that you are one with God, I and the Father are one, because there are separate parts in that statement, because God is greater than you. God encompasses all being, and God has created you and your brother, so he's actually greater than just yourself. There's more than just you that God has created. God has given you a brother so that you won't be alone. And that's why we have awe of God. It talks about having awe of God because God is greater than you, and you are taking the second place to gain the first. And the authority problem is this whole problem of believing that you are literally God's absolute equal. Now, we are one with God. We're like God. We're created to be like Him. We share everything with Him. But we are not equal in every way. Otherwise, this is the whole authority problem, is the belief that we are not only God's equal, but we are beyond Him. And so this idea of oneness can become the authority problem, where egos are believing that they are everything and that there's nothing else. That's an ego thought. So it's very interesting to watch how people think and how they thought. For as long as I've been talking to people about the Course, every single week there's a new person coming along with the same problem. They're thinking in an either-or way. They're projecting this onto the Course. They're adopting a non-duality thought, a thought of exclusive oneness, and they're stuck in it. And they can't see that anything else makes any sense. So they think this is the absolute truth. There's no other possible way to explain it. There's nothing, no other possible thing that's better than the oneness, or more simple, or more true. Every single week there's another person comes out the woodwork believing in the same mindset of separateness, looking at God's reality with separateness, drawing the same false conclusions with separateness. Beginner students do this. Intermediate students do this. Advanced students do this. Teachers of the Course do this. There are very renowned teachers of the Course who in general are wonderful people, and they have a lot of good things to say, and they're very helpful, but in this area, very often extremely mistaken. Now, they're not guilty and sinful, but A Course in Miracles is not non-duality. You can at best say A Course in Miracles model of reality is partly, half non-dual, because there is a oneness. It's very much God is all there is, a oneness. But that's not the whole story. There's another whole piece that this egoic mindset tends to deny, because it can't understand it. So it shuts it out and says that's not the part of the truth. It's not compatible with oneness. It's not compatible with oneness in the way these people are thinking. It has to either be this or it has to either be that. They can't see how to reconcile the oneness and the many. They can't reconcile the fact that God is oneness and has creations. It doesn't make any sense to them. So there's all kinds of weird justifications and manglings of the Course. So at most, the most they'll grant you is A Course in Miracles has an aspect that is non-dual. This world doesn't really exist. God is all that exists. But within God, it is not non-duality. It is very much a system of both. It's a system of a oneness that is also many, and parts that are wholes, and wholeness in every part. and creations. A Course in Miracles is a creationist system. It's a teaching that God is a creator. And we have to allow for that. And the only things I found that allow for this and resolve the paradox and make it okay for there to be many beings without it implying separation, without it implying ego, is to adopt this idea of a holographic principle is the working of God's mind. The holographic principle is how reality is structured. The holographic principle is how infinity works. It's how unlimited absoluteness works. It's how God's nature is this way, this transcending of limits, the whole of God is in each part of God, and it giving rise to creations where there is a part of God that contains the whole. That's you. It's me. So, but it's a worldwide problem that so many people are having, not because of all the massive amounts of distorted teaching that's coming from many A Course in Miracles teachers, not just because of all the ways that people spout about Course being non-duality and there's only a oneness and blah blah blah. This is all pretty basic thinking. This is not outside the box, and it's not compatible with A Course in Miracles. But it's coming up frequently and over again from different people, because the human population is heavily conditioned to think in an either-or exclusive way, and they don't realize that they've adopted this whole way of partitioning and excluding, and all of that machinery of separation is functioning in the thought process, in the reasoning, in how we make sense of things, how we draw conclusions. And nobody's going to believe anything that they can't make sense of. If something seems to make sense to you, you'll take it to be the truth. And this is why people are coming to false conclusions about A Course in Miracles, because it seems to make sense to say it's non-duality. It seems to make sense. Something can make sense and not be true. How about that? That's a fact. If you start with the false premise, you can make it make sense and still be false. So conclusions that seem to be true may not be true. But because people are so used to thinking in these ways, they don't realize how it's influencing their view of reality, or how different reality is from space-time, how the structure of God's mind and being is so incredibly unlike this world. Earth, which is heaven's opposite in every way. So everybody's thinking in a very egoic way about A Course in Miracles. We're having false perceptions about the Course, and we're projecting the ego thought system onto God. And the conclusion we're drawing within that thought system, without leaving it, is oh, it seems like God is a non-dual system. That seems to be the only possible answer. That seems to make sense. Okay, I'll take that on as my belief about what the Course is saying. Fail. Not correct. So it's a bit sad just how widespread this problem is, and how many people are teaching it, and how A Course in Miracles is becoming equated with non-duality, because it's the only thing that seems to make sense to how most people think. But we've got to look at the ways that our thinking process is based on separateness, and how we're drawing conclusions using the ego thought system, and how even the logic and the reasoning that we use is rooted in separation. If this, then that. Seems logical, but it's not true. God must have one son or many sons, and he can't have both. Can't allow that, even though the Course says that he has both. God loves all his sons, knowing them all as one, is because they are both one and many. One and many is reality, and that's not the same thing as dualisticness. It's not space-time. Space-time is what you get when you take a holographic system, the whole is in every part, and you try to draw a little boundary around a part so that it doesn't seem to share everything with the others. And so now you've got the individual being that was already an individual being in heaven, with a wall of separation around it, separating it off, making it estranged, a stranger, as though a black sheep, and seeming to be a separate self. And the way to resolve this is not to annihilate the self that God created, it's to remove the separateness that surrounds this part, so that the wholeness can be reintegrated and accepted as identity, and the part can return to the awareness that it is the whole kingdom of God, and it's one with God and one with its brothers, and that there are still many brothers and we're all one. So you don't need to get rid of individuality in order to have a perfectly functioning, valid system of reality that doesn't contradict itself. God gave you your identity as a soul, as a being. You've been fully created. I am still as God created me. You are still as God created you. And because we are like God, we're like each other. And because we're like each other, we share everything as a family of God, and we are one with each other. I am fully me, you are fully you. We are all of God. But we're still ourselves, and that doesn't make us separate. Doesn't make us have an ego. You don't need an ego to have a separate self. You just need to have a body or a thought of separation. The thought of separation was not a thought of producing many individual beings as a fragmentation of a sonship. It was a isolating of the beings that God created, a cutting off of sharing, an end of sharing. The ego is the idea of selfishness. The soul is the idea of self-fullness. All of God is in me, all of God is in you, everyone else is in you, you are in everyone else. But that does not mean that you don't have a self. This is what A Course in Miracles is really teaching. And unfortunately, it's a pretty sad situation that more than half of, if not more, probably 3/4 of people that are studying the Course currently believe the only thing that makes sense is that this is a non-duality teaching. It's the only conclusion they can come to that makes sense to them, because they're locked into this either-or exclusive way of thinking and reasoning and drawing conclusions, and they don't realize how their own thought process is working against them. They have not questioned the progression of thinking as they reason. They have not asked themselves if it actually lines up with God's reality. They haven't seen outside the non-duality mindset. Yes, there is something more than just oneness. There is something more true than just oneness. There is something more real than just a oneness. People have taken this oneness thing too far, and it's excluded creation. It basically turns God into a lonely, isolated thing. There's God sitting by himself in heaven, bored shitless, being all alone, just God. That's oneness. That's fine. Except it makes God dead, because the Course says love has to be given, and it has to be extended, and it has to be shared. And if it's not given, it is not love. So in order for God to have love and life, God has to give, and he has to give all of himself. And this giving is a creative act, and it has an effect. The effect is creation, the creation of you, the creation of the sonship. So God says God has created the sonship, and he has created you to add to the sonship, or the kingdom. If God was only a oneness that did not create, there'd be nowhere for the love to go, there'd be nowhere for it to share, no giving, no unconditionality, no creation. It would make it impossible for God to be love. And God wouldn't be alive. God would have to stop existing. So when you've got a oneness without creation, it literally logically arrives at the conclusion: God is dead. God is lifeless. God is ungiving, uncaring, doesn't have any relationships, doesn't love anything, doesn't share. If God doesn't share, doesn't have anything to share with, all of God is not in every part of God. And parts of God are lacking God, and God is lacking himself, and God is disappearing, and God is dead and doesn't exist. If oneness is the only truth, God does not exist, and oneness doesn't exist. So this idea of oneness literally cancels itself out on a logic basis. So it can't be that there's only a non-duality. It can't be that there is only a oneness, because the nature of love and life and giving and sharing, the nature of the absolute, the omnipresence of God, isn't compatible with just being a blob all by itself. Such a blob would cease to exist. So reality is oneness and duality. Reality is one and many. Separation, ego, bodies, is the many part without the oneness part. The many selves, the many brothers, the many sons of God, without the sharing. So they become selfish and isolated and cut off by a body. This is A Course in Miracles. This is the full metaphysics of A Course in Miracles as Jesus intends it. If you can take on board the holographic principle and go look it up and read a bit about it, if you can take on board paralogical reasoning, go and look it up, Google it, find out what paralogical reasoning is and how it works, how it supports both and, you will start to see beyond non-duality, and you'll start to see, wow, look at the courses talking about this paralogical stuff. There's all this stuff about sharing and the golden rule. There's all this stuff about things being true of me and you. There's all this stuff about God having creations that are one with him and yet are many. I never saw this before, because I was blinding myself to it with this non-duality closed box. If you open your mind to this idea, I guarantee it will open your eyes to a whole new area of A Course in Miracles teaching that you didn't see and that you wrote off as being something not true when it was in fact true, and it will be a revelation to you that you've been guided to look away from the whole truth by people who think they have the whole truth, because to them they've arrived at the end of their thought system and have concluded that it's the whole truth, when in fact they haven't. They haven't even got outside of their ego. They haven't even gone outside the system of thought of separateness. You have to radically get outside the box and think differently if you want to comprehend the paradox of reality and understand how to resolve all paradoxes, so that you can see the full teaching of A Course in Miracles and realize why the non-duality part was only part of the truth. And you had part of it true, you had part of it right, but the other part, you kind of glossed over that and you kind of left it in the dirt, and you kind of stuck a band-aid on it and you kind of hid from it. Open your eyes. There's more to A Course in Miracles than non-duality. There is more to A Course in Miracles than just oneness. It's all in there. Go take a look. I think I'm going to pause, since I've been yakking for an hour and a half. Could go into this even deeper, but it's a lot. It's a lot, and I really do understand why people think how they think, why they conclude non-duality, what's wrong with that system, how they came to that, what they didn't see, what more there is to see, and I do get how difficult it is. It's the Course's truth and reality is so strangely sort of far beyond anything that you're used to, that it takes a pretty big leap to really get your head around it. It's not, God's reality is not compatible with how most people in the world think about anything. So it requires a pretty radical change in your mind and how you think about stuff. And the truth is that if you don't make this change, if you don't open up to these dynamics of the golden rule and how giving is receiving and what applies to you applies to another without cancelling them out, and how we can be many and one at the same time. If you don't open up to these possibilities, you can't really understand how to get out of special relationships. You can't really understand how to stop being selfish. You can't really understand how to respect other people's freedom. You can't see your brother as your savior. If you can't understand how the wholeness is in your brother, and you can share the wholeness with him while still being brothers and still being one and still being brothers and still being one, you kind of can't get the whole message of the Course, that we need to adopt this whole different mindset that's based in what is true of me is true of you, rather than what's true of me is not true of you, or what's you're the guilty one and I'm not the guilty one. It's a whole different way of thinking, and way too many people are not going there. They're just staying in this box, staying in the ego, staying in the separateness, thinking the same way they've always thought, not getting out of it, not getting outside, not getting the message of A Course in Miracles, that God has a great big family. We're all equals. Everybody shares everything. Everybody has everything simultaneously. This defies all possible other logic. Course says that each soul has everything individually. This is the miraculous power of the soul. For you to have everything would imply everybody else has nothing. But it's not true. Everybody has everything simultaneously. This is the omnipresent transcendental truth of A Course in Miracles, and you should be celebrating this and embracing it, instead of all this separating off and excluding that and putting that in a box and it can't be this because it's that, and using separateness to try to understand reality when reality is not, it doesn't function that way. So please, please, please open your fucking mind. I'm going to stop yakking. Hope this was helpful. Talk to you again. Bye.